Hello BookTube, this is part 15 of my 2022 library tour. Today I'll be continuing on with history. This is History 3. Finishing off the top part of my first history bookcase. Well, technically there are 3 history bookcases, one on top of another. This bookcase here was one of the 2 bookcases built by my grandfather 26 years ago, and we've used it for decades. So anyway, let's get on to the books. First of all is my beloved Big Wonderful Thing, A History of Texas by Stephen Harrigan. This is how history should be written. Narrative, witty and pithy and irreverent, and just, this is probably my favorite history book of all time. It is so well written, so good. And I would kill to have a history of ancient Egypt or the Hittite or Mesopotamia written in a similar style. Love that book. Next is Invisible Armies, An Epic History of Guerrilla Warfare from Ancient Times to the Present by Max Boot. This is a history of guerrillas and how they fought, why they fought, why they usually lose, in what circumstances do they win. And it's been a while since I've read it, not because I used to check this out a number of times for my library before I decided to buy this book 2 years ago, maybe 3. This is an ex-library copy from Redondo Beach Public Library. Next is another great history. These Truths, A History of the United States by Joe Lepore. This came out a few years ago and is a really good history of the United States, although, of course, there are some missing bits. Certain histories aren't as looked into, or aspects of American history aren't as looked into as others. But for what it is, These Truths is an amazing book. I love it. Next is another behemoth, The Napoleonic Wars, A Global History by Alexander Mika Baridze. I'm hoping I got the pronunciation right. This is the Napoleonic Wars, the conflict between France and the rest of Europe in varying alliances from the late 18th century to 1815, and Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo. While most histories of the Napoleonic Wars usually look at the European theater, Mika Baridze looks at the totality of the Napoleonic Wars throughout the globe, throughout the planet. And this is a phenomenal book. It is really, really good. Next is Great Civilizations of Ancient Africa by Lester Brooks. I've had this book for a number of years. I picked it up from the Friends of the Library book sale 7-8 years ago, and I haven't gotten to it yet. It's an ex-library copy from Robinson High School. Next is Wind in the Tower, Mao Zedong and the Chinese Revolution, 1949 to 1975, by Han Suyin. This is a history of really the first decades of the People's Republic of China. Han Su-yin was I guess at the time she was a relatively well-known author, a novelist who became enamored of the communists and wrote two glowing histories of Mao and the Chinese Communist Party from during the revolution and during the first decades of the People's Republic of China. I picked this up from a friend at the library book sale, roughly around the same time I picked up Ancient Africa, and this came from actually the Waco-McLennan County Library itself. So I read it last year, and I didn't particularly care for it, particularly having read Tombstone by Yang Jixing before. It kind of soured me on this. So anyway, next is America Bewitched, the story of witchcraft after Salem by Owen Davies. This is a history of various American witchcraft traditions, from sort of Appalachia, in Pennsylvania, sort of thing, through the witchcraft panic, neo-paganism, that sort of thing. It's very fascinating. Quite enjoyed it. I've read it a few times, so it's really, really bears reading. Next is Island Stories, Britain and Its History in the Age of Brexit by David Reynolds. This is a really good book. It is irreverent. It is very good. I mean, I loved it. Picked it up from a book depository. And while, as Steve Donahue says, usually the American covers are hideous, in this case, the UK cover is hideous. I really would have liked to have the American cover because it's just... Anyway, but the book itself is great. I love it. It's been about 2 years since I read it, though. Or maybe I read it... I think it's been 2 years. I could have read it... early in 2021, but I think I read it sometime in 2020. Anyway, next up is a history of one of my favorite periods of history. This is a history of the ancient Near East, 3000 to 323 BC, by Mark van der Meerup. This is a history of ancient Mesopotamia through Alexander the Great. And it is really good. I quite enjoyed it. I would periodically interlibrary loan this book from my local library, and I would gobble it up. And I really wanted it, and a few years ago, I picked it up, finally. And this is a used library copy from Miami University, Middletown, in Middletown, Ohio. Next is The First World War by John Keegan. This book I picked up, 15 years ago from St. Edward's University. I mentioned a few times before, St. Edward's would, I think sometime during the fall semester, bring out some library carts. And those little movable carts, and stack books on them. And basically a lot of them were discards. Some of them were, I guess, donated. And this was one of those books that was donated. And I picked it up and had it in my collection ever since. And it is a quite interesting history of World War I think. It's been a while since I've read it, though. Let's get to the last section. Next up is Fire and Blood, the European Civil War, 1914 to 1945 by Enzo Traverso. This is a really fascinating look at early 20th century Europe, particularly Traverso's combining the First and Second World Wars as one big conflict. This book is, dense and rather academic, but it is, I would think, well worth reading. Quite enjoyed it. Next is The Slavs in European Civilization. Oh, The Slavs in European History and Civilization by Francis Jovornick. Haven't gotten around to this yet. It was one of the books I picked up from the Friends of the Library book. So I think the last time I went, this was one of the books I picked up. It's from the Lena Armstrong Public Library, of which I have no idea about the Lena Armstrong Public Library. I really need to go look that up. But anyway, I haven't gotten around to that one yet. Another book I picked up from the Friends of the Library book sale the last time I went. This is Medieval Warfare, Triumphant, Domination, and the Wars of the Middle Ages by Peter Reed. Haven't gotten around to this one yet either. And finally, another pickup from the Friends of the Library book sale from a few years ago, alongside Wind in the Tower and Afri. Great Civilizations of Ancient Africa. This is The Rise and Fall of Maya Civilization by J. Eric S. Thompson. And I haven't gotten around to this one yet. And it is... this is from the Texas State Library, Austin, Texas. So, anywho. So, that was History 3. I'll be continuing history for the rest of this week and most of next week. So, we're leaving one of my grandfather's bookcases behind, and we will be moving on to the lower bookcase that I'm really not entirely sure what the provenance of it is. I got it from my brother when they moved from a house they were renting to a house. They moved here to McGregor like 5 years, no, going on 6 years ago now, and they decided to give me one of their bookcases because I have a lot of books. Not nearly as much as I do now, but I've always been in need of more bookcases, and so they gave me that one. This one also is one that they gave me, and I think this one too. Both of these were ones they gave me, but anyway. So yeah, so that concludes part 3 of history and part 15 of the overall library tour. I'll be back tomorrow with part 16 and history 4, and I will also be doing a book tag, the birth year book tag created by Criminali. So until then, BookTube, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.